Good morning, dear friends. It's Gordie coming to you from the traditional territory of the Okanagan First Nations, specifically the Soyuz First Nations. Behind me is a metal carving of a chief in prayer. The chief of this particular nation, Chief Louis, loves metal carvings, and you see these all over the reserve. And I'm at Spirit Ridge, which is the resort that we like to come to, one of my favorite places on earth. I think you can see a little bit of it in the background there. And then as we go this way, behind me you can see a vineyard, not the church, a real vineyard. Canada's first Indigenous vineyard and winery, and the actual winery is there in the background. And then we see the lake in the background, a Soyuz lake. It's been pretty hot, but it's quite cool right now. It's still quite early in the morning. And then you see Canada's only dry desert. Very beautiful vegetation, very different. It's only 5 hours from you in Vancouver. Very unique, very beautiful. And I wanted to just send this postcard on behalf of Kathleen and me this morning, just saying we're missing you all. And on this August 1st long weekend, happy BC Day. Just wanted to send a few reflections and thoughts. We've been away 2 weeks. The first week was very intense in Calgary. Of course, visiting family, but also for our National Vineyard Family celebration that was held in Calgary. And then we drove to Soyuz last Friday and have been here since then, and plan on returning home on this coming Friday. So I wanted to just offer a few thoughts. It's been such an intense and emotional week in Canada. Another one we've had. It just seems the last few years we've had numbers of events like this. It was only a year ago that we were just all in corporate traumatic trauma over the discovery of the missing Indigenous graves, unmarked graves in Kamloops. 215. That has now grown to, I understand, over 4,000 verified unmarked graves of missing children. And again, we are having to come to grips with the darkest chapter, perhaps, of our history in Canada. The Indian residential school system and the cooperation between the church and the government in colonialism and the attempt to assimilate and deal with the quote unquote Indian problem, and the cultural genocide that occurred. And this past week has been so emotional as the Pope Francis came to our country on Canadian soil, fulfilling the longing of so many to come personally to Canada and to apologize for the role of the Catholic Church in the Indian residential school system, which was run mainly by the churches. The Catholic Church wasn't the only church, but by far the largest church. I think over 50 to 60%, something like that, of the schools were run by the Catholic Church. Could be even higher, but definitely the most were run by the Catholic Church. And so this past week has been very, very, for some healing, for some a sense of being able to move forward. And let me just give this caveat. I'm not First Nations, so I want to offer a reflection on this week with the recognition that I am not Indigenous. I am a settler. I am part of the, I represent the colonial system in some ways, having grown up in this country and had the advantage of that, my advantages in my own life. And secondly, I'm not Catholic. I love the Catholic Church, but I'm not a Catholic. And so these remarks are said with that caveat. But I am a settler, I am a Canadian, and I am part of the church. Church Universal, and I'm also a human being that lives here in Canada communally with everyone else. And so these remarks come with that caveat. And as I've said, there's been just such a mixed response that I have observed, especially amongst the First Nations community, from people who've been healed and have a sense of closure, all across the board, to those who think the Pope's church apology was disingenuous. It wasn't real. It was a sham. And then everything in between. We've seen such a gamut of emotions. And of course, the Pope arrived in Edmonton last Monday, and at Matchewich gave his first apology to the Indigenous people of Canada. And then he had a mass and a few visits to residential schools, then moved on to Quebec, reiterated his apology. He called this the journey of a penitential visit, a penitential journey here in Canada. He also then went up to Nunavut, and so in doing so apologized to the First Nations, to Métis, and to Inuit people, all who were impacted by the residential school system in Canada, and apologized for the role of Catholics in and institutions within the Catholic Church. And of course, how can we expect anything other than this mixed cauldron of emotion, of anger, of relief, of grief, triggering. There was triggering that went on, and trauma that was triggered again. And of course, this is so important for us as a church. This is such a part of our journey, particularly because of our journey with Lower Post, right on the Yukon border, which was the site of one of the most notorious residential schools here in BC. And our own Francis Carlick went to Rome with a delegation of Métis, Indigenous, First Nations, and Inuit people in March to personally request that the Pope come to Canada with an apology. And of course, he gave that moving apology in their presence in Rome, and Francis has told us the story. And Francis warned us when she came back. She said, be prepared. There's going to be reaction. There's going to be the whole gamut of emotion with this, because there's so much healing that still needs to go on. And she was right. She was right about that. The 94 calls to action, there's a section in those, and when I say calls to action, this was the result of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They came out and was published in 2014. There were 94 calls to action for the road to reconciliation. And there was a section that was aimed at the church. And one of the key calls in that was for the Pope to come and apologize for the role of the Catholic Church in the Indian residential school systems. I've reread that call this week. I've looked at it, and I've listened prayerfully to what the Pope has said and what he's done. And I believe that he fulfilled that call. Now, there are other calls around that call that still need to occur. The whole renouncing of the doctrine of discovery, which in the view of the Catholic Church has occurred. Popes that followed that doctrine of discovery, which was issued in about the same time that Columbus sailed, 1493, was basically giving colonial powers the right to so-called empty lands, which was kind of the essence and the basis for colonialism that governments set up. England, France, Spain, Portugal used this as a justification for colonization, and popes and for enslavement. It was terrible, and popes that succeeded that pope rescinded that. They overruled that. They changed the doctrine of discovery. But meanwhile, it had seeped and found its way into the colonial systems and impacts law to this day. So it needs to continually be renounced, and that is called for in the calls to action. There are other calls, the the divulging of important, critical, missing information about missing children in the residential schools, and so the Pope has promised that. The Canadian Catholic bishops are meeting this September to discuss what's the next steps forward in light of the Pope's apology, and what does renouncing the doctrine of discovery look like at this stage in our lives. And that's a question we all need to ask, is how do we decolonize? And so I really do believe, as a settler, as a non-Indigenous person, as a Christian in our land, this is really a time to listen. This is really a time to learn. It's really a time to be present to our Indigenous sisters and brothers, to continue to listen to the stories of Sini and Stephanie and others in our congregation who've been either in residential schools or impacted by them through family. And so I don't want to talk a lot about it in this season. I think it's important to set a context for silence. But there is an image that just is so stark to me that kind of defines where I think we are as a country and what God is inviting us to as a church, as a nation. And it was the first day when the Pope had issued his apology, his first apology at Matsiwich in Alberta, and he just finished, and Chief Littlechild, one of the commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation, there was 3 commissioners and he was one, came up with a headdress, a chief's headdress, and placed it on the Pope's head. And he had gotten permission and sought, just consulted with different elders and leaders of the Indigenous community about that before he did it. And it's not the first time it's happened. It was given to Stephen Harper at his apology in 2008, I believe, and other Canadian leaders. But he had consulted. Nevertheless, at that point, an Indigenous woman named Sepiko, who's from northern Manitoba, about 800 kilometers north of Winnipeg, broke out into this passionate song. She was in full regalia, and she broke out into this passionate song that sounded like "O Canada." And now it wasn't "O Canada," but the music and the melody sounded like "O Canada," and but it was in an Indigenous language. But as you looked at her face, you didn't see joy. You saw pain. You saw grief. You saw anger. And it turns out that song was an Indigenous traditional hymn for the land in their Cree language. And she sang it out, and it was to the Creator to cleanse and purify our sacred land. And then she spoke some words to the Pope that, to the effect, is that we will not be subject to any law except the laws of the Creator, the just laws. And there was definite defiance there, and anger and hurt. You could just see the grief and the tears streaming down her face as she spoke. And I felt that it was such a powerful moment, such a defining moment. And the camera went back to the Pope, and the Pope was just standing there, listening to her, receiving what she said, receiving her anger, receiving her rage. And I thought about what must have been triggered in that woman as she saw this headdress, this sacred headdress, being placed on the head of the Pope, and the Pope representing the face of what has been the source of so much pain, so much hurt, families being torn apart, trauma. And this white, male, Christian leader representing the heart of so much pain to her. No wonder it triggered her, and I'm sure it triggered many, many other Indigenous people across the land. And so I want to leave that picture with you because I think that defines where we are as a nation and as the church. I think we need to be quiet, as the Pope was, just listening gently. I felt his body language was a posture of receiving her and simply being present to the pain, recognizing that we are part of the system that is the source of that pain. We have benefited from that pain, and it is time to repent. It is time to change our way of thinking. It is time to decolonize. And I think each of us has to ask the question, how do I decolonize? How do I pursue this journey of decolonization in my own life, in my church, in my school, in my place of work, in my neighborhood? What does that look like? Of course, it doesn't mean that we just give lands back and go back to Europe. It means going back to the treaties, the wampum of two nations living together, mutually respectful, mutually beneficial, blessing one another, the two rivers of the wampum belt. That's how indigenous people see North America. What they call Turtle Island is a nation-to-nation relationship of respect. And so what does that look like in my neighborhood? What does that look with my church, my community? What does that look like as we continue our journey with Lower Post? And the picture is so powerful for me because it reminds me that we are in this journey together, that our healing is tied up with one another. It's a mutual journey of healing. We need each other for this healing. So I just wanted to leave you with that blessing on this BC Day weekend and just say that we miss you all, and we're looking forward to returning this coming weekend, August the 6th, and continuing our journey of reconnecting and regathering this summer. So however you choose to celebrate it, alone, with family, with other brothers and sisters in the church this weekend, happy BC Day weekend. God bless you, and we look forward to seeing you soon.